YouTube, how's it going? My name is Kevin, also known as Phoenix, and today we're going to be talking about why you should be playing Izzet Turns. Now, for those of you who have been living under a rock for the past few weeks, Izzet Control or Izzet Turns, whatever you want to call it, is a late game control deck that looks to really use cards that combo together really well to push cards like Alrund's Epiphany over the top. Now, this taking turns type of deck isn't as strong as the previous taking turns deck that was in standard, which was based off of Nexus of Fate, but this is also very strong as taking turns is generally just a good thing to do in Magic. So, like I said, we're going to be using cards that combo with Alrund's Epiphany really well, such as Galvanic Iteration, that is going to be allowing us to take 2 additional turns instead of 1, and creating 4 birds instead of 2. So let's start off with talking about the strengths of why Izzet Turns is a good deck. Why are people playing it, and why is it just so darn popular? So first and foremost, I want to say that this is probably the strongest control deck in standard at the moment, and it's kind of also a combo-y type of deck as well, but we're just going to call it control deck for now. This deck is probably the strongest control deck. Currently, there are some changes in the meta that are happening, as is the case with standard, and as more and more sets are going to be added to it. Who's to say what's really going to happen, but currently at the moment it is the strongest control deck. One of the reasons why this deck is so strong is because of cards like Galvanic Iteration. Now, Galvanic Iteration, the first and foremost combo that you're going to be using this card with is you're going to be pairing this with Alrund's Epiphany. You're going to be taking double turns, you're going to be making double the birds. It's just good stuff all around. But this card can be pushed even further beyond. This card is not just limited to, oh, I can get another extra turn, which is already really good, but let's say you're going up against aggro and you need to really be able to clear the board. Well, you pair this with a card like Demon's Bolt, for example. Now all of a sudden it curbs really well. 2 mana, you foretell the Demon Bolt. Turn 3, pay 2 to cast the Galvanic Iteration, pay the 1, cast the Demon Bolt. Now you have 2 Demon Bolts to deal with 2 of the creatures. There are other cards as well, such as Unexpected Windfall, create 4 treasures instead of 2, and also drawing 2 cards and only discarding the for 1 of the casting cost. Definitely very strong. So Galvanic Iteration is one of those cards that definitely pushes it over the top, and why I kind of consider this a combo-y type of deck. But overall, definitely a very good card, and it's really what kind of pushes this deck over the top. Another key strength that we have with the deck is how deep this deck can really search into its library with cards such as Expressive Iterations, Unexpected Windfall, Memory Deluge. You're able to dig so deep into your library that no matter what the answer is that you need, you're more than likely going to find it, assuming that you have the turn to take off to be able to find it. Cards like Expressive Iterations are going to be able to get you your land and replace itself with a good card into the hand. Memory Deluge having Flashback for 7, definitely going to let you dig really deep. Unexpected Windfall, not only is it going to allow you to dig deeper into your library, but giving you the mana to accelerate your game plan into the combo of Galvanic Iteration plus Alrund's Epiphany. The deck has a lot of synergies built in, and it's just a very well functioning deck all around. One line that is very popular to think about is Galvanic Iteration plus Alrund's Epiphany for the double extra turns, and on the first extra turn you are going to be using maybe a Memory Deluge, Flashback even, to find your other Alrund's Epiphany. And would you look at that, Galvanic Iteration has Flashback, so you're able to do the combo again and just beat your opponent down with a bunch of birds. And before we move on, I also want to wrap up this kind of section of why the deck is strong with turns decks are generally just very oppressive. These types of decks typically try to make it so your opponent doesn't have the opportunity to interact, while you are getting double, triple, even quadruple the value out of taking multiple turns. Again, this type of deck isn't as strong or oppressive as Nexus of Fate was. However, it is still kind of breaching that territory because you are able to take the multiple extra turns. Now that we've gone over the strengths of why you should be playing Izzet Turns, I also want to tell you all why you should not be playing Izzet Turns. I don't think it does these guides very much justice if I just tell you the strengths of it. I also want to let you all know what are the weaknesses of this decks, these types of decks. Like, there's no infallible deck. You know, every deck has a weak point, so to say. And the weaknesses for this deck I'm going to start off with is it's freaking hard. It's very hard to pilot. These types of decks don't have a one traditional line that you can follow every single time and be able to get the win, even though it looks very oppressive, which it is, on, you know, maybe you're watching it on Twitch or maybe during Worlds or whatever the case may be. These decks are very difficult to pilot, and that is not necessarily a weakness, but I do want to note that if you just pick up this deck and you do happen to notice like, okay, well, I'm losing a bunch with this deck, it may just be because you're not familiar with all the lines or the decision making process that comes along with this type of deck. Another weak spot for this type of deck is, well, it's kind of vulnerable to fast aggro decks. You know, while you're taking turns to dive deep into your library for the exact answer, or maybe you're trying to find your Alrund's Epiphany, or you're taking a turn to cast a Memories Deluge. These are turns that aggro decks will definitely exploit. We have been seeing an increase in mono white aggro, which is even faster than mono green. And these types of decks we're seeing increase in popularity while there's a decrease in Izzet control. So I think there's definitely a correlation there, and you should definitely be on a lookout for aggro decks and kind of have a mental note of, if I'm going up against an aggro deck, I need to have answers for these creatures. And the final weakness that I'm going to cover for this type of deck for Izzet turns is that it has a hard time ending the game. Yeah, you're taking all these extra turns, but what are you doing with them? You're drawing into more search spells. There are no creatures in this deck other than the 1/1 birds. Now you can end the game with the 1/1 birds, but sometimes it's not enough, and you're looking at a board state where if you let your opponent untap, they're just going to win on the backswing. So definitely keep that in mind, that this deck does take very precise navigation to be able to get the wins, to be able to end the games very cleanly. Definitely one of the weaknesses of this deck that I've noticed. So bringing it down to the final conclusions of why you should play Izzet turns, you should play this deck if you enjoy combo control types of decks. If you like to do things with a lot of mana, very big oppressive things such as copying extra turns or getting double search spells or whatever the case may be, this is definitely the type of deck for you. Galvanic Iteration is a very fun card to kind of cast and, you know, double the value of whatever you're playing. So I definitely recommend, if you enjoy combo control, this is the type of deck for you. Now, while I did mention earlier that these decks are falling in popularity slightly, I do recommend that you still play the deck. It is still very strong, and there is still room to adapt and like kind of make adjustments in the list. As I said, at the end of the day, this is a control deck, so it has to adapt to the meta. There are always answers, generally speaking. Now, within standard at the moment, it's kind of limited because of the card pool, but Izzet does have a lot of good spells in it at the moment, so definitely would recommend and try to make some innovations to the deck to see how you can combat the aggro decks. And now that we've gone over everything, I've given you my thoughts, I've given you why I thought this deck is strong and why it's weak, I'm going to give this deck a 7 out of 10. I think this deck is still really cool, I think it's really strong. Do think it needs to adapt to the aggro decks a little bit more, but overall, generally speaking, very good deck, very impressed with it. And that's going to wrap up things here. I'm so glad that you all made it to this part of the video. Thanks for watching. Leave a like, comment, and subscribe down below. It really does help the video out. And please let me know, what deck would you like to see next on why you should play. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.